Now, to catch up from where I was in the last episode, the only thing I've done was I gave everything a panel line wash, a pen wash, using an acrylic black wash. But I used the Vallejo game wash, the same one I used in the last episode. But any wash product, any thin down paint, oils or enamels would work. I just chose to go with the acrylic product because of the drying time. And then I went back and I just brightened up the bolt detail, little greeblies like this, a few other little elements, and I just used this AK interactive pencil. This one is called aluminum, but I just went around and just touched up the stuff. It's very quick to do it with this, and works really well. Could have done it with a paintbrush or something like that, but I just chose to do this. And now what I want to do is, pretty much everything in the Warhammer universe is old, and it's rebuilt, repurposed, kept going, however you want to say it. So things get really, really old, and an easy way of showing age on an object that's metallic, like this is to start adding some kind of rust tones. Now, to start suggesting rust, there's going to be more rust that I'm going to add later, but to start suggesting it, I'm going to use this Citadel Skrag Brown, and I've thinned it heavily with water, maybe 3 parts water, 1 part paint, because what I'm going for is I want it to be very low opacity and very thin, but I'm just going to sponge it on like this. And this is another one of those things that it's kind of, you'll know it when you see it if you're going for this kind of look, because I don't want to overdo this, because I'm going to be adding more rust to the model later on in much more specific areas. But this just suggests that the whole thing has just got, it's got some maintenance problems. It's just rusty, and this is selling it to the brain. That's what this is doing, so that when somebody looks at it, it establishes, hey, that's a rusty thing. If you get a little too much, like right there, more than you want, just use the side of the sponge to just soak it up a bit. But then areas like this, I'm going to put in more rust there eventually. And then, like I said, in other areas. One of the things I consider when I'm thinking about the colors that I want to use, the weathering that I want to use, I don't just do a step and then when I'm done with it, think, now, what's the next step? I kind of imagine what I want the end product to be, so to speak. And then I think about, how do I balance those colors? So in this case, as I was thinking about the rust, I thought about, how is this going to interact with the eventual earth effects, the dirt effects that I put on. Because when this sponged on layer of rust dries, it's going to, in some ways, look almost, mud splatters. So I wanted to take that into consideration. So my planning, based on that thinking, is that the later earth effects are going to be much more focused on streaks and larger deposits of earth effects, and I think I'm going to keep it a lighter tan, a dustier color, so that there's a difference between this rust that I'm putting on and those later earth effects, so that they are, somewhat distinguished from each other. You don't have to do it that way, of course, but I like for the different elements to stand up. But I think it helps me to plan ahead, to think about what's the total picture going to be like, so that as I'm going along, I've already got my kind of playbook in mind. How am I going to approach this whole thing and try and keep some cohesive logic to the whole process. And yes, is it horribly overthinking it? Maybe. But again, I find that process fun. All right, there it is. It's just kind of imparting the idea that this is a rusty thing. Like I said, there's going to be more to come along. It's either rust or maybe measles. I don't know. But I like the look of it. That'll work for me. Now I want to add in some additional rust tones. These are going to be more deliberate, more intense. I want to do some around the bolt detail. Maybe not all of it, but a good bit of it. Around some of the details like this. And then just from various areas to streak rust down. And again, the idea is to sell the notion that this thing is old, that it's well used, that it's worn, that it's, it's been in combat continually in bad elements. This is a sci-fi world, and it's if you're not familiar with the lore, for Warhammer 40k. This is technically from Warhammer 30k, but from Warhammer 40k, their big saying is, in the grim dark future, there's only war. I like to add ice cream because it seems to make me laugh. But anyway, it's over the top. And so when it comes to weathering, I like doing things over the top with it. Now for doing the rust, I'm going to make use of something I forget that I have quite often. This is an AK, a colored pencil from AK Interactive. The color is strong ochre. They sell these individually and in sets. This is actually part of a rust set. But you can see approximately the color there. But what I'm going to do is I just set it on my palette somewhere like that, and I have just a cheap liner brush here. Already got some water on it. Just got a cheap liner brush here, and you could use a good liner brush. I just happen to have the cheap liner brush on my desk, and I'm just going to wet the tip of the pencil like that and start picking up some of the color. And this is an acrylic color, but it has nice properties in being able to work the color after application more than you can with your typical acrylic paint. Your typical acrylic paint, once you put it on, it's on. See, I can put that on like an acrylic paint, and I can streak it down a bit. With this, once it dries, you've got some time, you've got in its properties, you've got some ability to work the look of it, the shape of it. I'm going to come in here and just soak up just a little of that. See, as I soak it up, how it just kind of reduces. That's something to keep in mind when you're working with acrylic products, because in general, you're talking about an additive process. So if you put down some, and that was deliberate, I know people say, yeah, sure was. No, it really was. But because I knew I could soak it up, but I'm going to let that start drying. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add in some rust tones to fill this in, because, you know, any damage like that, I'm going to, let's just say the word, I want to make believe that it's going to rust more heavily than it would if it had not been damaged. So, and that's, you know, that's really what we're doing when we're building our models, especially these sci-fi models. So we're doing some make-believe. Even when I build real things, you know, when I would build Spitfires, I didn't miss out on the opportunity to imagine being in them, you know? I mean, you've got the cockpit there before you when you're building it. You see what's in it. You know, I would quite often just look at it and close my eyes and try to imagine. Not that I glorified it, but, you know, try to imagine, say, for instance, you know, a fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain. What that would have been like, you know, taking my own experience in a place where people like to shoot bullets at you. Imagine doing that in an all-out war, you know, at 25,000 feet above the ground, 30,000 feet. So, you know, there's an opportunity to just kind of think about these things. But with this, you can really just let your imagination go. And I think that's part of the fun. But you see, I'm just putting this around, and I can't say there's any particular reason why I chose this bolt and not this one, but I'm going to do that one. I just do it, and then I look at it and evaluate it, and if it seems too much, then I dial it back. If it seems like the right amount, then I leave it. So let me let that dry for just a minute, and then I'll show you how I manipulate those. Alright, these dry pretty quick, and my brush, it was damped in water, and then I just wiped it off on a paper towel like that, so it's just very lightly damp. And all I'm going to do is just come in and start working the edges of that. I think I need a little more moisture. Hang on. Sometimes when I'm between doing things, I'm waiting for it to dry, I wet my brush and then forget to start doing it, and it evaporates. But you can see I can just start streaking that down. I can start blending it back. It's not quite as workable as oils, but from the sense of acrylics, it's about as close as I've found. And yes, I've tried Noosh. And while it did pretty much what the basic demonstration said, it was not as oil-like as I felt a lot of people claimed it was. But that's just me. But see, I just work this like this. And wet my brush. And just pick up color, move it around, thin it out, slide it back against itself. See how you can do that? The more water, the more you can activate it. The more water you add, the less opaque it becomes, the finer the streak becomes. Now the pencils behave very nicely in that if you just apply them, they tend to give a very nice streak and finish of their own. And the color can be very intense. You do have to be careful in later steps that you don't reactivate them and smear them around. What I do is after I tend to do pencils all at the same time, and then put some kind of clear varnish over it to just lock it in place before I start putting other steps. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just live dangerously. If you ever see me put on decals and I use the tip of my knife blade to move them around, sometimes people say, don't you tear the decals? Yeah, from time to time I do. But it also works very well, so I balance out the risks, act carefully, and if the decal tears, I accept the consequences, fix it, and move on. Don't worry about it. But you see how I'm doing that? And it's just fun to sometimes I just like to see, okay, how much can I get away with? How much can I streak it? How much can I manipulate it? How much can I play around with it? Does it take a while? Yeah. That's the fun part, though. At least I think so. So I'll continue doing this and get the whole thing rusted up. One of the great things about working with these pencils is that you can just leave them on your desk. There's no lids to put on, no bottles to shake. I've just been leaving them sitting here, and then every now and then when I start to work on them, I grab my brush, wet it, dip into one, do what I'm going to do, dip into the other one, do what I'm going to do, wipe it off. I mean, they're really fast in terms of if you only have a few minutes, you sit down and you just work. As long as they're sitting there, now you can pick them up and put some pencil on the model or whatever, but they're just I've had them for years, and sometimes I forget that I have them, but I'm rediscovering how handy these AK interactive pencils really are. Now, just to show how useful they can be in terms of, rust effects, this particular set, this was originally painted iron hand steel, I believe, and I don't think I did anything more than just use the silver pencil to highlight some edges. And then I just went in with these three colors. This is light rust and strong ochre and what's the other one? Vivid orange. And I just sponged on each of those colors. I mean, I literally just took the sponge and wet it and pushed it against one of the pencils until I got some color on it and sponged it on, and then went to another one and sponged it on, and just went back and forth. And then I did a wash using the strong ochre, and I really like that rust effect. And it's just drop dead simple. It's literally just taking a sponge and just sponging on color and letting it run and blend together. And if it gets a little strong in one area, I kind of moderated it with a brush. And I think it ended up looking pretty good. Only took me about 5 minutes. Now, these two dealies right here, I'm not sure what they are, but to me, they look like something that would be some kind of air extraction system that would pull air from the inside and vent it out, and that these are armored covers. So, because I'm thinking that when this big shooty pew-pew on the front fires, there's going to be a lot of gases from the gun inside. And so I'm considering these fume extractors. So I'm thinking down here beneath them, there would be quite a bit of soot or something like that. And I know you could say, yeah, but in the future they would probably use smokeless ammunition. Yeah, they probably would. Who cares? This is all make-believe. I just want it to look cool. So what I'm going to do is I've left these unglued. So let me pull these off and see if I can make them, see if I can make them look smoky. Now for this, I'm gonna continue using these AK interactive pencils. I'm having fun with this. I'm glad I rediscovered these, and they sit right up here off camera, right in front of my face, up on my shelf. but I just forget that I've got several sets of them stacked up there. So I'm just going to go in here, and this one that I'm using is called Rubber, and it's kind of a dark gray, kind of a bluey gray. The main thing is it's a dark color. And I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start stippling that in around there. Need to work a little harder on this one. Hang on. Pick up more of that color. There we go. I'm just going to keep doing that. Working this color onto it. And maybe a little up here. Just to represent, okay, if the gun gases are getting blown out through there, how is that going to look? Just give it a little bit of a sooty appearance. I could use other things. I have pigments would be very good for this. I have some Vallejo pigments that would work very nicely for this. You could use thinned paint. You could use wash. I mean, any of the things that you've got that can, that are going to be a dark color could be used. But like I said, I'm just having fun with these pencils. And so I'm just going to keep dabbing this on here till I see how it looks. Weathering is always about experimenting and learning new things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just take this bit of sponge that I've already been using, and where I've got the color on there fairly opaque, and it's just slightly damp, I'm just going to go along and dab that on there and let it moderate it just a bit and randomize it. See that? As the guy said with the slap chop, you getting this, camera guy? Yeah, I like that. It just knocked it back a bit, but it made it a little more random. And I think that looks half decent. And that's how that looks. Is it subtle? Yeah. Are most people going to notice it? Nah. But I like it. I had fun doing that. Any vehicle is going to get some stains on it. From fluid, from oil, from hydraulic fluid, from radiator fluid, from super future space marine combat fluid. So I'm just going to use a couple of different colors. And sometimes I like to just put fluid stains down in almost just random places. Like here. And notice that I'm just being very light with my touch. You can make a big old stain like that. But I like to be lighter with my touch. And sometimes, people complain about with acrylic products about the tide mark issue. Sometimes I like to get a little water on my brush and just water down what I've placed in there and let the tide marks happen. Because sometimes I think they look pretty good. So I'm just manipulating this around to add the stain. Now this color I'm using it's a contrast paint from Citadel called Cygor Brown. Just think of it basically as a fancy overpriced wash. It's more or less what it is. I mean, I know it's not, but come on, let's be real. And but you could do this, of course, with oils or with enamels or any of our modeling stuff you could do it with. But I'm just going to go in and just put a few here and there. Now, with Warhammer vehicles, they don't always have things like fuel filler caps and stuff like that. Sometimes they have things that you could imagine to be fuel filler caps, and sometimes, like on this one, it's not really something like that. So, in those cases, I don't worry about it. I just put stains here and there, and I leave it be. So let me get a few of these on here. I'll move on. Now I'm going to use another Citadel product. This is one of their shades. It's called Targor Raid Shade. I have no idea what a Targor is or why they would get in a rage over their shade, but that's neither here nor there. But it's one of their shades. What I like about it is it's kind of a dark purpley color, but I find that if you want to represent fuel stains, it seems to work pretty good. Now what I've done here is I've thinned it with water. Now Citadel a lot of times will tell you shouldn't thin these with water. You should use their medium, Lamian medium. And that's true if you want to retain the intensity of the color and things like that. But I find that for fuel stains and other stains like that, sometimes I like to just thin it with water. Now if you over thin it, it can get kind of a chalky look. So be aware of that. But I think sometimes where you do these spills, if you put multiple colors in one place, kind of let them overlap, I think it just sells the notion a little more. It's not striking. You can make it striking using more contrast, and I don't mean contrast paint, but contrast in terms of color. But I just think some stains around here and there look pretty good. Sometimes I just put stains in streaks for no real reason. Like right here, I'm just starting it in the middle of nowhere, and I'm bringing it down and just blending it around. It's not going to be a huge stain. Maybe somebody dropped oil. Maybe somebody threw something over the side from being in the hatch up here. Maybe this is the vehicle commander's morning coffee and he was interrupted and had to go do big shooty pew pew things. But I just like putting those sometimes just random places because it's fun. I base coated the exhausts in Vallejo neutral gray. And now I'm just going to take some Vallejo sky gray, and using this small piece of sponge, I'm going to sponge on some of the sky gray. This is just a piece of plastic tubing used to protect a paintbrush. But it's a really great way to get some very fine control for sponging. Now I'll use another Citadel shade called Fuegan Orange to just coat all the exhaust in that color. Now I'll use another Citadel shade, Agrax Earth Shade, to go in and just outline the details to create some shadow, and also to get each of these little vents. I could have drilled these out, but ain't nobody got time for that. Now I'll use some Scale Color 75 black. I'm just going to use this big, fat, wide brush to just dry brush that black along here to represent soot. I'm going to use that same color just to paint the top edge of the exhaust, because I want that to be really sooty and down inside. Now I'm going to use this little dealie here that I bought one time, and I don't remember why or what it's supposed to be for, but I know that it's good for scraping paint off where I want to glue stuff. So that's what I'm going to use it for here. Now I'll go ahead and glue these exhausts on with some Tamiya Extra Thin. And the reason I'm doing it now is I'm ready to start doing earth effects. And the earth effects will get up on the exhausts. So I want to have them mounted so that it will be one hopefully cohesive process, which sounds really good when you're making videos, but sometimes doesn't always work out. in the real world that way. Let me give those a little time to dry. And there's the exhausts. I have to wonder where the engines are if the exhausts are there. Now I want to start adding dust effects up the sides of the model, and of course the front and on the tracks and all of that. And I want to start with kind of the layer, the background layer that will be represent dust and light dirt, not, chunky dirt, but just the streaks and colors that get on the side of a vehicle that's been, used in combat, outdoors, in some environment. Now, because of the colors that I've already used, because there's this silver color, silver gray in the background, and then I've got the rust colors, I want to be very careful in choosing what I apply for earth effects, because I don't want it to be something that's so, say, brownish orange that you have trouble deciding, okay, is that rust or is that dirt? Now, does it amount to a hill of beans? No, because in reality, there may be a rusty thing that's running around. If you ever go to, I know, for example, in South Georgia here in the U.S., where I was born, a lot of the soil is made up of red clay. So if something's rusty and then you ride around in the red clay, you can't tell the difference between the rust and the red clay. So I know that's realistic, but I'm making an artistic choice that I want to present dust and dirt that's not going to conflict with the already applied rust colors. So I'm going to go for something that's more of a light sand, deserty, or urban type environment that's not going to conflict, so that the two will still stand on their own. Now, part of what I'm going to use is one of my favorite weathering products, which is Vallejo Model Wash. And this is the color Desert Dust. They make a bunch of colors for this. And I find these great for weathering. I highly recommend them. Now, it's a little yellowy, the Vallejo wash, so I'm going to use some of these VMS pigments. I'm just going to drop that in there just to alter the color just a little bit. And it's going to definitely matte it out and just change the color. And all I'll do is just mix that in until I get the color I want. One thing I always do when I'm using these Vallejo model washes, especially if I've mixed them with pigments, is I stir them up frequently, because they will, the pigments will settle out. Now, once you put the pigments on with this model wash, it's locked in place. It's not going anywhere. But I just do that every now and then to keep it mixed. But all I'm going to do is just take some of this. I'm going to start putting it on like that. Now, you're probably looking at that and going, my gosh, that's kind of crazy. And yeah, it may seem to be at first, but what I'm going to do is I'm working this in sections. So I'm just going to get a little water on my brush, like this, and then just blend that in a little bit and get it thinned out. Now, I probably could thin this a little more, but I want the control that comes with putting it on heavy and then thinning it down to see what I get. So you choose. Now, because this is a silver metallic surface, and I'm not done anything to matte coat it or anything like that, I've not put any clear varnishes on it, it's going to beat up a little bit. But after you get the first layer on, after I get the first layer on, you're just watching this. But after I get the first layer on, it's going to dry and it's going to matte it down some, and I can go in with second layers to build it up. And and get it looking just like I want. But as with other weathering things I've done on this model, you could use enamels or oils or pigments or other products. That the point is not the product, the point is the result. So that's you pick what works for you anytime you're building to get the result you want. One other thing to keep in mind about using these types of products is the hair dryer makes it really easy to move things along. So you can dry stuff up pretty quick. Now I'm also going to pull some of this mix off to the side, and I'm just thinning it with water from my brush cleaning cup, otherwise known as a coffee mug. I'm just going to thin it way down with water and just go over the tracks and put it on fairly heavily just to give them some dust. Now I'm holding it at this angle so that the camera will pick it up nicely, but normally I would hold it like this because that's how I want it to look pretty much when it dries. So I'll go over it several times, and then I'm going to damp off my brush on this paper towel and just go through and in a few areas just dab up some excess. Just let it sit dry, just like that. All right, now that I've got the basic dust on there, and I'm ready to start adding some more textured earth effects, I'm going to put the tracks on because I want to do that more textured earth effect with the tracks on. It was easier to deal with them with these washes, with them off. And if you watched the early episode of this series, you'll remember that on the tracks I marked where they go, like this one has RF on it, right front. So let me go on here and get these track sections glued on and continue the weathering. Now I'm going to use a Citadel technical paint called Armageddon Dunes, and all this is a texture paint, meaning it's got mud, dirt in it. And just going to put this all down here, all like that. And then I'm just going to grab some water and I'm going to work it in like that, just like that. I'm just going to keep doing that across the model until I get it worked out like I want. By working a section at a time, I make sure that I have time to just kind of blend it in. You can blend it as much or as little as you want. Like there's some areas that might get more mud, like up in here. So I can just blob some in there and leave them. The tracks are not going to be quite as muddy because they're constantly moving. So the mud may work off of those, but up under here, may get some pretty good mud going on there. And remember, there's going to be more back here because the tracks themselves go back this way and they'll collect mud and then they'll dump it off up here. So there's going to be a lot more mud back there. Now, if you don't have this particular product, you can of course use other products from other manufacturers, or you can just mix some up on your own with some paint and maybe just some dirt from your backyard or something like that. Some pigments, some dirt, whatever. But just keep layering this on till you get it looking like you want. And this is how that looks when it gets mostly dry. It's been drying for several hours now, but there's still a few places that are a little damp because I got it really pretty wet. You can see there's some mud like in this area right here that's gathered. Some under here. I could do more. You know, there's a lot on that wheel, not as much on
on this other one. You know, it's entirely up to you. For me, a lot of times it comes down to, am I bored with it, or am I wanting to do more? I got to the point this morning that I just said, it's good enough. And I put that on there. You'll notice here, I put a little more on right there and right there, just because that seemed like a place when it was, you know, it's splashing through stuff. That would be a place where it would collect. And then towards the back here, you notice I made it a lot more muddy. Got it collected up here because as the tracks come back around, they're going to be covered in mud. So there's going to be mud that'll build up right here, and it'll push up over that edge. And then, you know, if it falls off here, but it might clump up there. So the back is a lot more muddy than the rest of it. And then the front, you can see, and I don't do the bottom. I don't worry about that. If you look at the bottom of the model, you know, my modeling's not for you. I also put some mud on the dozer blade here. Not a lot. I could have muddied that up more. My theory, and before I start going down the rabbit trail of theory, I put a little on here too, because it's going to be kind of up above it, and I figure when the gun fires, you know, maybe it'll shake off or something. Why it won't shake off the rest of it, I don't know. It helps me sleep at night to think of these things. But, you know, in reality, if you have a military vehicle that's in a very dusty area, the whole thing's going to get covered in dust. There were times that when I was in the Army that I would be riding around in our Humvee or something. It would be out in the field. Maybe it was very dry and we were going up and down sandy roads, and we would get back after a few days and the whole thing would just almost be yellow from the dust, especially if you've ever been in the southern U.S. when the pine trees are blooming, when there's all that pollen in the air. Everything can turn yellow. You know, there have been times I've driven home at the end of the day and the sun would be setting low in front of me and you could see the haze on the horizon would be yellow. So you can cover the whole thing if you want. What I chose to do is to take more of an artistic approach, where if you look at the top, you get more of a sense of the metal and the staining and the rust and things like that. If you look lower down, you kind of get more of the dust effect and the dirt effect and all of that. So it's kind of an artistic decision. And I could have brought the dirt and the dust further up the side. You know, it's subjective. If you have a photo of a model and you're looking at that and you're thinking, I want to make it look like that, then make it look like that. But if you're just making it up as you go along, that's one of the things that I do, is I just think, how much of this do I want to be dusty? How much do I want to go for realism versus, you know, just a very subjective approach? And I tend to take a more subjective approach, you know. I truly do get it to the point that I go, yeah, I like that. I'm good with that. And I don't worry about if somebody looks at that and says, well, you know, if there's this much mud down here, then the theory of mud distribution says that you should have it this high up. I don't worry about that. I could have done more rust colors on here if I wanted to. I might still add some in one day. Who knows? But it's for me, this whole model was really an experiment in, okay, if you were going to build something that's all metal and it's a ground vehicle. I built all metal aircraft, but that's a World War II aircraft, but that's a different thing. And I thought, if you're going to build it, how would it look? How would you weather it? So this in many ways is an experiment on how I would do it. And as of right now, that's pretty much how I would do it. There's one other step I need to do as I'm looking at it. You've got these vision ports here, and you could just paint those black or dark gray and just kind of gray them out. But in the Warhammer world, they're usually a kind of glowy color. A lot of times people will paint them. I've done this. People will paint them with multiple colors, say red or blue, and then go from a very shaded look at the bottom to a very highlighted, to put a little white glint over in one corner, to make it look like a glow effect. But because it seems like the theme of this build is the sweet brown theme, you know, ain't nobody got time for that. I'm just going to use Ammo MIG Metallic Red. It's just a good poppy, metallic-y, bright red. And I'm just going to go with a single color on there. And all I'm going to do is paint these vision ports. And where did I see one other? This little dealie here, I'm going to paint that because that looks like some kind of aiming thingy, dealie. And then where was the other? Oh yeah, there's a couple more, one more right there. And I'm just going to use a liner brush to paint those. And I'm not going to show it simply because I've got to get this right up to my face so I can get in there and not touch everything else with red paint. But all I'm doing is going to be just touching it in with this cheap liner brush. And yes, I have nicer liner brushes, but this one's out on my desk, so why not go with it? And I'll show you what that looks like. And that's how that looks. It's just a nice, shiny, poppy kind of paint. If you were going to matte coat your model, I'm not going to put a clear coat over this, but if you were going to matte coat your model, you would want to do those kind of, if you were going to use these kind of metallic paints and you wanted to have some kind of glow effect, you would want to do that after the matte coat. Now this is the point in a model build that I usually just walk away from it for a while, anywhere from half an hour to a day or two, just depending on, you know, my schedule and what else I'm having to do. But I just come back and I look at it later and I think to myself, is there anything you want to adjust? Not that I can't pull it off the shelf 6 months from now if I still have it and adjust it, but you know, I look for ways to adjust it. Like if you put on, let's say, the dirt effects and you're just not happy with the color, well, you can brush some thinned paint or inks or shades or whatever over it to tint it, to change the color, to make it darker, to make it lighter. If you want to put in some additional washes to re-emphasize the shapes rather than leaving it looking muddy like that and a little less defined, you could put that in. You know, it's just kind of looking at the whole thing and saying, what steps do I want to add anything away? Do I want to minimize anything? Do I want to completely paint over something and do it again? And so that's the point I'm at now. Now, as I'm looking at it now, I'm pretty happy with it. But you know, there's nothing that it doesn't hurt anything in my mind, at least for my work, to just give it a little bit and come back and look at it later and go, is that what I want? Is this how I wanted things to end up? So let me just walk away from this for a little while, and probably in that process I will glue the rest of the pieces on and then see where I end up. All right, I've let it sit for a little while, come back and look at it, made a few adjustments. I put some more of the Cygor Rage shade around this dealie Mahopper right there and on there. Still kind of drying. I just thought it needed a little more staining there, and realized I'd forgot to put any kind of shade over this, so I did that. Just put some Nuln Oil over it, and that pretty much is it. I glued everything on, and you can see how that looks. I'm happy with it, you know. Not the best work I've ever done, but I'll admit I kind of just blew through these steps. I mean, I had fun with it, but I didn't spend a lot of time sweating over it. I could have done more. If I had to go back and change anything, there's one thing I would change, and it doesn't show as much on camera as it does in real life, so to speak. The underlying metallic color when I put the washes on it to darken it down, I shifted it a little too much to gray, dark gray. I either should have not done that step, or I should have started with a brighter, lighter silver color and then darkened it down. Because I started with Iron Warriors, which is very dark. And then I began distressing it with Iron Hand Steel. And you remember then I put, if you saw I think it was the second episode in this series, and then I put the dark wash over it. Now that I'm looking at it, if I had it to do again, the one thing I would do different is I would start with Iron Hand Steel and then go to distressing with Rune Fang Steel and then put the dark stuff over it. Because at this point, it would be more metallic and less metallic dull gray. And I know this may be closer to what Canon is, maybe not. But to see the difference, I wanted the barrel to look a little different, so I based it in Iron Hand Steel and then sponged on Rune Fang Steel and then put black wash over it. This is how I really wanted this to look. So if I were going to change anything, that would be it. But everything else I'm pretty happy with. Somebody might look at it and say, yeah, you went over the top with the rust. No, I wanted to go over top with the rust. That was part of the experiment of, okay, let's take a metal thing and see how much rust I can put on it. How's it going to look? How much is too much? How much is not enough? How much is just right? So I deliberately pushed it to the, there's always a continuum of none and completely covered. And I went maybe about 70%, 60% of the way to fully covered. But I wanted to see, what would that look like? I like the way it looks. If I did it again, would I use that much rust? Probably not. I would also probably add in a second rust color to these kind of things here. But I was just having fun using those pencils. So, you learn. Every model should be a learning experience. And people ask me frequently, how did you learn all these techniques? It's by doing this stuff over and over and over and over and over again and changing things up and doing it a different way and trying a different way and trying a different product and putting it on with a brush and with a sponge and with a stippling motion with a dry brush and, splattering it. And, I've done everything short of just getting a mouthful of paint and spraying it over it. I wonder. No, don't do that. I'm just kidding. But that's how learning happens. Is just doing things over and over and over and making little adjustments and see what it looks like. And it just adds. If you think of your knowledge of modeling as a toolkit, it just adds tools into the toolkit. That's what it does. Based on the statistics, within about the first week, for the 12 or 15 of you that are still here at the end, thank you. I do appreciate it, and appreciate you watching the whole thing. I hope this has in some way been helpful and just showed some ways of doing things. And more importantly, I hope that I've been able to demonstrate if you're, if you ever think, well, how do I know what to do, or what's the kind of the framework for decision making? I hope that the information I've given you is helpful in that aspect of it. That even if the techniques aren't really super advanced or anything groundbreaking or earth shattering or any of that stuff like that, if every technique I've shown you, you already knew how to apply that, but if kind of telling you how I approach it and how I think about it has helped you, good enough. That's what I want to. That's really important to me. Is that is what has been helpful. So anyway, thank you for watching. And as always, you know the deal. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. So happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.